I'm Bill Fleming. What you have just seen is a sample of college football in the 70s. In preparing this program for your exclusive home video cassette entertainment, we had to view more than 700 games played during these past 10 years, and a description of every play from those 700 games was logged in this book. And from that, we chose what we think to be the very best. Whether this is your first sports tape from Magnetic Video or whether you're adding it to your sports library, it's going to be a very valuable addition. You're going to receive many hours of enjoyment recalling some of those memorable moments in America's most colorful sport, college football. So let's go to the top of the decade, to that first year, a memorable one it was too, 1970. The decade of the 70s began with two teams sharing national championship honors, the Longhorns of Texas and the Cornhuskers of Nebraska. Texas roared through the Southwest Conference with a perfect 7-0 record. They were led by the scoring leader of the league, fullback Steve Worcester, the first great running back out of the wishbone offense. A two-time All-America player, and for 3 years voted to the All-Conference team. In his senior year, he compiled a brilliant 5.6-yard average and scored 14 touchdowns. He was voted the most valuable player on the Texas squad in 1970. Today, Steve Worcester owns the Lone Star Beer Distributorship in San Antonio, Texas, but he still basks in the glory that was his in Austin. As a sophomore, little Johnny Rogers of Nebraska teamed up with quarterback Jerry Taggy to lead the Cornhuskers to a national co-championship with Texas. Rogers flashed the form in 70 that would eventually lead him to All-America honors and the coveted Heisman Trophy. We'll be seeing him really turning it on a little bit later, but this is a pretty good example of his great abilities. The Fighting Irish of Notre Dame contributed 2 players to the All-America squad of 1970, Tom Gatewood and Walt Patulski. Gatewood was a 3-year starter at split end for the Irish, and at the end of the decade, he still held Irish records for career receptions and touchdowns. He had all the ingredients of a great receiver, the most important of which was speed and the ability to get free. That, with his smart football sense, made him a perfect choice in Ara Parseghian's offensive machine. The Irish defense in 1970 was led by defensive end Walt Patulski, number 85. He made the All-America squad as a junior. 1 year later, he would team with Gatewood as co-captain of the Irish in the year they scored their biggest victory, the one over Texas in the Cotton Bowl, when they became the first team to really break the wishbone. Patulski, at 6'6" and 260 pounds, was just about as punishing a defensive player as the Irish ever had. Many times, his quick penetration would set up the tackle for his teammates. But more often than not, he would be credited with a solo. After his final year at Notre Dame, Walt Patulski was the top draft choice of the Buffalo Bills. However, he never really reached the heights that many thought he would attain in pro ball. Nagging injuries cut his career short. Today, he's a businessman in Syracuse, New York. But his feats at Notre Dame will long be remembered. Franco Harris was destined to become one of the greatest pro running backs in history with the Pittsburgh Steelers. During his collegiate career at Penn State, he rushed for 2,002 yards. This was all the more surprising since he shared backfield duties with Lydell Mitchell, who is Penn State's all-time rushing leader with nearly 3,000 yards. No one who followed Penn State football was surprised when the 235-pound Harris was a first-round draft choice of the Steelers, where he became an instant hero, just as he was at Penn State. Ohio State's middle guard, Jim Stillwagon, number 68, and his teammate Buckeye linebacker Jack Tatum, who wore number 32, both won All-America honors in 1970. Tatum was just about as fierce a player as the Buckeyes ever had at his position. He was always able to force the big defensive play. He and Stillwagon combined on many defensive thrusts. Oftentimes, their hard hitting would cause a fumble, like it did here against arch-rival Michigan. Stillwagon also won both top national honors for linemen in 1970, the Outland and the Lombardi trophies. In his final home game against Michigan, the OSU co-captain was phenomenal. He had 12 solo tackles and a dozen more assists, as he and Tatum led a defensive charge that resulted in a 20-9 victory and a Big Ten championship. Stillwagon and Tatum were both part of that freshman class of '67 recruited by Woody Hayes, called by most the finest ever at Ohio State. 14 of those players were drafted by the pros. 4 of them were first-round picks. Stillwagon played his first year in Toronto and was named All-Canadian Defensive Lineman after that rookie season. Tatum became one of the most feared defensive players in the NFL with the Oakland Raiders. He began the new decade with the Houston Oilers. When football fans recall the past, they have a particular admiration for 2 of the Buckeyes' best, Stillwagon and Tatum. The player who was accorded the top honor in college football in the year of 1970 was Stanford quarterback Jim Plunkett. For 3 straight years, he led his conference in passing. In his senior year, he guided Stanford to the league title and a berth in the Rose Bowl. He then passed them to a 27-17 victory over Ohio State. The total offense career mark of Plunkett still stands as the high water mark in conference statistics. His 8,178-yard total may never be surpassed. No one yet has come within 500 yards of it. He threw to so many different receivers: Vataha, Brown, Lassiter, and more. Perhaps his most crucial assignment came in the game against Washington. Going into that game, Plunkett was number 2 in the nation in passing. His opponent was Sonny Sixkiller of Washington, who was rated number 1. What a duel those two staged that day in Palo Alto. Washington trailed 21-14 in the 4th quarter. On a 4th down play, Sixkiller scrambled. Somehow, he was able to spot an opening, and he scored a Washington touchdown, making the score 21-20 Stanford. Then Sixkiller changed all that very quickly with another scrambling play. Going for 2. He spots Ace Bolger, number 85. And Bolger grabs the ball for the 2-point conversion, and Washington leads 22-21. But Plunkett was a master under pressure, and everything was hanging in the balance: the conference championship, the Rose Bowl, even the Heisman. He fired this touchdown pass to Randy Vataha, giving the Cardinals a 29-22 victory. Plunkett's amazing career continued into the 80s with the Oakland Raiders. One of college football's most unusual plays occurred during the 1970 season in the game between Alabama and LSU. The ball was bobbled around several times and finally wound up in the end zone of Alabama, covered by Alabama. Coach Charlie McClendon argued that it should be a safety, that LSU should get 2 points. He claimed the impetus that put the ball in the end zone was supplied by Alabama. The officials ruled otherwise. They called it merely a touchback. Well, let's look at it again. LSU quarterback Bert Jones laterals to fullback Alan Shorey. When Shorey is hit, the ball pops loose, is taken in midair by Alabama's Ed Hines. He tries to lateral to a teammate, but the ball goes into the end zone, where it's covered by Ed Norris of the Tide. Well, it could have been ruled either way. As it turned out, LSU won the game 14-9. The Coach of the Year award of 1970 went to Alex Agassi of Northwestern, who took his undermanned Wildcats to a 2nd-place finish in the Big Ten. The Nebraska Cornhuskers had to share a national title in 1970, not so in 1971, when they won it outright with their greatest team ever. Coach Bob Devaney felt justifiably optimistic before the season. He had all the ingredients: a strong defense, the quarterbacking of Jerry Tagge, and the power and explosiveness of runners like Jeff Kinney and Johnny Rogers. Here's how the coach looked at the upcoming season.
Our strong points for the 1971 season, I believe, could well be in the amount or the number of fine defensive football players we have returning. We have 7 of our 11 starters back from last year's fine defensive unit. And then we have our 2 quarterbacks returning that played a very important part in the last 2 conference champions and last year's national champion. I believe these factors, as far as individuals, plus the tremendous desire that Nebraska teams have shown to win, I think are the strongest points we have going for us.
A little later on, we'll see the Nebraska team in action in the Oklahoma game of '71, the game of the decade. The Ivy League contributed their first player in 5 years to the All-America squad, Ed Marinaro of Cornell, the most prolific scorer in the history of the league. His 52 touchdowns and 6 extra points gave him an average of 16.4 points per game, 3rd highest ever in college football. After a brief pro career with the Vikings and the Jets, an injury to his foot caused him to give up football, and he launched a new career as an actor in Hollywood. When you go back and look at the running of Johnny Musso of Alabama, you can see why he made such a lasting impression on the pages of the SEC and Alabama record books. No runner in Tide history carried the ball more or gained as many yards as Musso. His durability was absolutely phenomenal. In 1971, he averaged 22 carries per game, and throughout the season, posted a brilliant 108.8 yards average per game. Johnny Musso was the big reason the Tide was able to come off a 6-5-1 mediocre season in 1970 to a perfect 10-0 season's record and the SEC championship in 1971. Johnny Musso concluded his pro career with the Chicago Bears in the late 70s and then retired from football to become a businessman in the city of Chicago. The Wolverines of Michigan had a workhorse of their own in '71, halfback Billy Taylor, their most valuable player and All-America selection. Here was a runner of such superb balance, it was almost impossible to take him down one-on-one. Perhaps no touchdown gave him more pleasure than the one he scored in his last home game against Ohio State. It was the only touchdown of the game, and it gave Michigan a victory over the Buckeyes, 10-7. The win preserved the perfect regular season record at 11-0 for the Wolverines as they headed for the Rose Bowl. For Billy Taylor, who later had some personal problems before he got things straightened out, this was one of the happiest moments of his entire life. There was a controversial play that occurred in that game that fans still talk about. With Ohio State trailing 10-7 late in the 4th quarter, they had a 3rd and 16 situation. But as you can see, Don Lampke's pass intended for Wakefield was intercepted by Michigan's All-America defensive back Tom Darden. Coach Woody Hayes was convinced there was interference on that play. He went out to argue his point with the officials. Let's look at it again. From this angle and at this speed, it appears as if Darden makes the catch cleanly. But now, if we freeze the picture at several critical points, it appears as if Coach Hayes had a valid complaint. In this picture, Darden is still not making contact with Wakefield. If we advance the picture just a few frames, we see Darden coming closer. And now, with the ball a considerable distance from the receiver, it looks as if Darden has made body contact in his efforts to get to the ball. Here, it looks like he definitely has hampered Wakefield's chances to catch it. Wakefield's head and shoulders are bent forward from the defensive pressure. And then, of course, Darden comes up with the football. Still just judging the way the play occurred at normal speed, it's difficult to see what really happened. Be that as it may, Michigan won the game 10-7, giving the Wolverines an undefeated season and an outright Big Ten title and a trip to the Rose Bowl. For some, a rather cumbersome souvenir. The Eagle mascot of Auburn was a proud one in 1971, as Auburn not only contributed 2 players to the All-America team, but also the Heisman Trophy winner in Pat Sullivan. His favorite target was All-America receiver Terry Beasley, consensus choice at split end. During his career, Beasley caught 29 touchdown passes in 30 games, an SEC record. And during his career, he averaged better than 17 yards per catch. Terry Beasley played with the 49ers until an injury sidelined him. Today, he runs a successful landscaping business in his hometown of Prattville, Alabama. And today also, Terry Beasley is still a very active Auburn alumnus. He never misses an Auburn football game. On the throwing end of this combination was Pat Sullivan, who came to Auburn after a brilliant prep career in Birmingham. He lived up to all that was expected of him. He was responsible for 71 touchdowns during his 3 years. That still is a Southeastern Conference record. As so often happens when there's a great passer at quarterback, the defenses are wary. They're always looking for that big pass that can kill them. That's why so often the misdirection and draw plays would work so well, like this one. And that's what made the combination of Sullivan and Beasley so devastating. When you talk to Auburn fans who saw them play, invariably they'll shake their heads and say, there'll never be another dynamic duo like those two. Sullivan is the only Auburn player to win the Heisman Trophy, and only the 4th player from the SEC to win that coveted award. His career in pro ball with Atlanta never really blossomed. Today he owns an insurance agency in his hometown of Birmingham. But for Pat Sullivan, the most memorable moment in his life came when he was informed that he had won the Heisman Trophy. But who wouldn't be inspired to great heights with such Auburn beauties on the sidelines? The year 1972 proved to be another great one for the Trojans of Southern California, the only team in major college football to have a perfect record that season, 12-0. They climaxed the year with a victory over Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, so it's little wonder they were named #1 in the nation. Under the astute coaching of John McKay, the Trojans scored more points than any other USC team since the fabulous offensive machine of 1929 under Howard Jones. The secret of the Trojans' success? Coach McKay talked about it after being named Coach of the Year.
We give our football team, the players on the team, a lot of ability to make their own decisions. We audibilize or change the play on the line of scrimmage quite often. We very seldom send in plays. We try to train our quarterback that he can do that. And basically that's it, and that we want to be in better condition than the other team. We don't care whether we're bigger or not, though sometimes we are bigger. But we want to be out-conditioning the other team.
Defensive tackle John Grant was one of the reasons for the Trojans' success on defense. He was singled out by John McKay as simply the best defensive player he ever had at USC. 230 pounds is not really very heavy for a defensive tackle, yet Grant turned his into about as destructive a force as one could imagine. He later became a member of the Denver Broncos, one of 37 USC players to be on the NFL roster at the end of the decade. Offensively, All-America tight end Charlie Young was the guy the Trojans called on in tough situations. He was called the Tree because of his massive torso and long arms. He caught more passes than any other tight end in Trojan history. 6 of his touchdown passes came in the Rose Bowl, and look at him block out ahead of a ball carrier. He continued his football career into the 80s as a tight end with the San Francisco 49ers, and he was the NFL's Rookie of the Year in his first year of 1973. The Seminoles of Florida State produced an All-America quarterback in 1972 in Gary Huff. As a junior the previous year, he led the nation in total offense, the first FSU player to win a national title. His performance in '72 was all the more noteworthy since injuries decimated the Seminole running game and all of the defenses were set to stop Huff. He still managed to become the nation's second-ranked passer. Beginning in the 80s, Gary was the backup quarterback with the San Francisco 49ers. Otis Armstrong of Purdue was the Big Ten's most valuable player in '72, finishing his collegiate career with 3,315 yards, Purdue's all-time best. He still holds Purdue's single-game rushing mark of 276 yards. His greatest asset, other than the ability to break the big play, has been his durability. Injury was never a problem with Otis Armstrong. He still continues his outstanding football career as a running back with the Denver Broncos. Greg Pruitt was twice named as a consensus All-America with the Oklahoma Sooners. He and quarterback Jack Mildren proved to be a devastating 1-2 punch, gaining over 1,000 yards apiece during the '71 season. But with Mildren gone in '72, Pruitt still was the man most responsible for taking the Sooners through a 10-1 season, and then a 14-0 victory over Penn State in the Sugar Bowl. One record Greg is most proud of that still stands is his 3-year career rushing average, a whopping 7.7 yards per carry. Not bad for a player who never weighed more than 177 pounds. He now is a running back with the Cleveland Browns. Great success was predicted for 280-pound offensive guard John Hanna of the Crimson Tide of Alabama, who was never bothered about not getting headlines in college as he cleared the way for the Tide's running backs.
Yeah, I've had more than my fair share of publicity being an offensive lineman. I know there's a lot that don't, but before I did get some of that publicity, I was happy just when we won the game or when our offensive backs ran the ball well, because they can't gain much yardage unless somebody's blocking. So I take that into consideration and let that be my goal.
John Hanna is still all-pro caliber with New England. By the way, at 282 pounds, he was the second heaviest rookie ever drafted. Bubba Smith at 283 was the heaviest. During his collegiate days, Brad Van Pelt did just about everything at Michigan State. He won 7 letters in 3 sports. He turned down a $100,000 bonus offer to play baseball so that he could play his final season of football with the Spartans. At 6'5" and 225, he was the biggest safety man in college football. In 1972, he was the winner of the Maxwell Trophy. And going into the 80s, he was still playing football with the New York Giants as a linebacker. The winner of the 1972 Heisman Trophy was little 5'9", 173-pound Johnny Rodgers of Nebraska, the most exciting player ever to wear a Cornhusker uniform. Throughout his career, he scored a touchdown in every 9 plays. His style of running was dazzling. Johnny Rodgers averaged 13.8 yards every time he touched the football. And he was tough, as well as being nifty. After playing pro ball in Montreal and in San Diego, he is now retired and is in business in San Diego. These were his thoughts when he accepted the Heisman Trophy in '72.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Honored guests at the head table. I didn't really plan to prepare a speech tonight because I felt that I probably would be too nervous to read my own writing, and I was right. I can't even hardly hear what I'm saying. I would just like to know that, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to make it, and I am going to go forward, and I am going to do a lot better things than I've already feel that I've done now. And I'd like everyone to know that on my way up, I'm going to try my damnedest to reach down to both younger people, both black and white. And so whoever grabs a hold, I hope to pull up with me. And I want to know that everybody who needs somebody, that I would like to be a part of them, because I realize that I couldn't have done it by myself. I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight to share with me the best moment in my best evening in my first 21 years of life. And I feel that in my next 21 years, I hope I do as well. Somehow, if I manage to do this.
Johnny Rodgers' jersey, number 20, has been retired. Only one of 3 Cornhuskers to be given that lofty honor. One last look at Johnny Rodgers in his final game, in the '73 Orange Bowl game, where he was the entire show. The victory, 40-6 over Notre Dame. Johnny Rodgers accounted for 4 touchdowns. He wanted to prove that his selection as the Heisman winner was no mistake.